had been watching my companion intently ever since he had sat down to the breakfast table. Holmes happened to look up and catch my eye.
"Well, Watson, what are you thinking about?"
"About you."
"Me?"
"Yes, Holmes. I was thinking how superficial are these tricks of yours, and how wonderful it is that the public should continue to show interest in them."
"I quite agree. In fact, I have a recollection that I have myself made a similar remark."
"Your methods are easily acquired."
"No doubt. Perhaps you will yourself give an example of this method of reasoning?"
"With pleasure. I am able to say that you were greatly preoccupied when you got up this morning."
"Excellent. How could you possibly know that?"
"Because you are usually a very tidy man, and yet you have forgotten to shave."
"Dear me, how very clever. I had no idea, Watson, that you were so apt a pupil. Has your eager eye detected anything more?"
"Yes, Holmes. You have a client named Barlow, and you have not been successful with his case."
"Dear me, how could you know that?"
"I saw the name outside his envelope. When you opened it, you gave a groan and thrust it into your pocket with a frown on your face."
"Admirable. You are indeed observant. Any other points?"
"I fear, Holmes, that you have taken to financial speculation."
"How could you tell that, Watson?" "You opened the paper, turned to the financial page, and gave a loud exclamation of interest." "Well, that is very clever of you, Watson. Any more?"
"Yes, Holmes. You put on your black coat instead of your dressing gown, which proves that you are expecting some important visitor at once."
"Any more?"
"I have no doubt I could find other points, Holmes, but I only give you these few in order to show you that there are other people in the world who can be as clever as you."
"And some not so clever. I admit there are a few. But I am afraid, my dear Watson, that I must count you among them."
"What do you mean, Holmes?"
"My dear fellow, I fear your deductions have not been so happy as I should have wished."
"You mean that I was mistaken?"
"Just a little that way, I fear. Let us take the points in their order. I did not shave because I sent my razor to be sharpened. I put on my coat because I have, worse luck, an early meeting with my dentist. His name is Barlow. Then the letter was to confirm the appointment. The cricket page is beside the financial one, and I turned to it to find out if Surrey was holding its own against Kent. But go on, Watson, go on. It's a very superficial trick, and no doubt you will soon acquire it."
The man seated in the private compartment of a railway carriage looked haggard and drawn. His usual steely eyes lacked their accustomed exuberance, and it seemed that this all-pervading tiredness sought to accentuate his characteristic features, the sharpness of nose and prominence of brow. Sitting with his travelling blanket pulled over his knees and his tweed jacket wrapped around his slim frame, he looked almost like a frail old man. It was only the deerstalker hat and ubiquitous pipe that he vigorously drew upon that dispelled this illusion. It had been with no small effort that I, his good friend, Dr. John H. Watson, had finally managed to prize him from his work that over the recent years had extracted so much from his typically robust constitution. But when we had received an invitation to join Lord Brantford in his quiet country estate for the weekend, I seized upon the opportunity to extract him from the grime of London with a much-needed holiday. We had been sitting in silence for some time, both calmed by the general rocking of the train and content with our own musings. It therefore seemed quite an abrupt intrusion when Mr. Sherlock Holmes suddenly leant forward to ask me a question.
Watson, have you ever considered the possibility of a member of the gentry being a cat burglar?
A cat burglar, Holmes?
A specialist in the art of breaking into a home, cracking a safe, and in this case a thief from the upper classes who makes his living by robbing the aristocracy of their trinkets of wealth?
Why, no, but I must say I find the premise most unlikely. For a start, what would their motive be?
I can think of two. Firstly, despite the widespread belief, I can assure you that the upper class suffer from as many monetary woes as their poor cousins. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, for the thrill and adventure.
I suppose there is no reason why the working class should have a monopoly on crime. But if a man wants to adventure, why not go hunting or exploring, not burglarizing your peers? Now I remember a friend of mine ended up in Africa, of all places. It was just about the time...
Quite. But just think of the potential of the situation. Being able to plot each robbery whilst attending a social function or a gathering, and once the crime has been committed, being able to make one's escape well above suspicion.
But a member of the gentry, no better than a common thief. In spite of what you say, I still find it hard to swallow.
And the fact that you consider the idea so improbable only serves to make it all the more likely.
And so it was that evening that Holmes and I sat down to dinner at Lord Brantford's estate. Across the table were two other gentlemen who were guests of Lord Brantford. The meal itself was uneventful and passed pleasantly enough. It was some time later, after the men were in the billiard room enjoying a cigar and some of Lord Brantford's finest brandy, that Holmes revisited the previous conversation. Holmes and Leslie Archibald were playing billiards, while his man kept score. I was seated with the lordship on a long, comfortable couch.
My friend and I have had a most interesting debate on the journey down here, didn't we, Watson? I opened up the question whether it was possible for a gentleman thief to exist.
What? A member of the gentry going round purloining jewels and pilfering valuables? That would never happen in England, old man.
That was rather your feeling, wasn't it, Watson?
It certainly was. A ridiculous idea.
I suppose it is the curse of the criminologist's mind to look for wrongdoing everywhere. But I suppose if I were, now what was the term you used, a gentleman thief, I would think of no better treasure than to take his lordship's ruby collection.
Quite right. A finer set of jewels the world has never seen.
In fact, did I not read somewhere that they were going to be on display soon?
Indeed. It's our 5th wedding anniversary next month, don't you know? The whole house will be darned up and on show. We've got guests coming from all over. Her ladyship is well connected in Europe.
And the famous Brantford ruby collection will be the centerpiece of the celebrations.
Oh, yes, and they'll be the pride of the place in my eye, after my dear wife, of course. They're to be brought down from the banker's vault in London on that day and taken back early the following morning.
I take it you aren't concerned about gentlemen thieves, then, your lordship?
By Jove, no. Besides, once the jewels are being exhibited, they'll be heavily guarded, and overnight they'll be kept in my safe over here. Indestructible, and more importantly, totally unbreakable. I had it installed 2 years ago. No secure safe in the country, the man said.
Perhaps you should be more careful to whom you reveal the hiding place. There you go again, Mr. Holmes. That criminologist mind of yours.
No, he's quite right, I suppose. But I think I can count on the people in this room, don't you? The famous Detective Sherlock Holmes and his Boswell, Dr. Watson. My good friend Leslie Archibald, captain of England's cricket team, and his companion Manfred Blandings.
Oh, that's most gratifying to hear, your lordship. Oh, most gratifying. I, for one, wouldn't like to be clapped in irons if your rubies happened to be stolen.
You really shouldn't be pulling my leg like that, you young buck.
It was the next day before Holmes and I were alone again, and Leslie Archibald and his friend had returned to London by the early train, and the rest of the household were engaged in other activities, chiefly preparing for the annual village hunt that was to take place on the following Monday. We opted for a quiet stroll in the beautiful Surrey countryside, in which the lord's estate was set. It was in these peaceful surroundings that I raised the question that had been on my lips all the previous night. Holmes, what is behind this gentleman cat burglar business that you've been going on about?
I was wondering when you'd ask that, Watson. It is simply this. Before we left London, I received a letter from Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. In the letter, he drew my attention to certain facts and entreated my assistance in tracking down this gentleman cat burglar, as he put it. I must admit I had long suspected the existence of such a man, as there has been a certain pattern to some recent thefts that could not be explained by any other means.
This is incredible. So you mean this man, Manfred Blandings, is out to steal his lordship's rubies?
Manfred? No, Watson. He is only the assistant. It is Leslie Archibald who is the mastermind.
Archibald? The captain of the England cricket team and one of the most acclaimed men in the whole of Her Majesty's empire? Oh, certainly not.
I could almost admire his audacity, if he wasn't a criminal.
You can't possibly mean that.
I said almost, Watson. No man who gives his life to crime will ever gain my respect.
Quite so. But certainly he won't attempt a robbery now that he knows you're on the case.
On the contrary, I think he is more likely to attempt the theft now. My involvement will only add to the sport of the affair.
But what are we going to do about it?
Archibald's well-placed confidence is derived from his reputation. Just look at your reaction to the suggestion he is a thief. No, the only way to take him will be to catch him red-handed, stealing the jewels.
When will that be? He could intercept them on the way from London before they even get to Lord Brantford's estate.
We are dealing with a master safe-breaker, not a modern-day Dick Turpin. And to steal stones on the day of the celebration would be too complicated. He's certain to make his attempt the night they are in the billiard room.
Could he crack Lord Brantford's safe? He said it's totally unbreakable.
My dear fellow, given enough time, even I could break that safe. I am certain that a man of Archibald's capability could have it open in an instant. But fear not. We shall be there lying in wait and ready to challenge him. Absolutely nothing can go wrong.
It was the day of the planned theft, and Holmes and I were sitting in our rooms at 221B Baker Street. It was early in the day, and we were enjoying some fine kippers and poached eggs that Mrs. Hudson had prepared. Unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door, and in came a slight scruff of a boy carrying a telegram for Holmes. After sending him on his way, with a sixpence in his pocket, he tore it open.
Hello, what's this? A message from Wales. Urgent. Matter of life or death. Believe being poisoned. Come at once. Alan Llewellyn, Earl, Pembrokershire.
Good heavens, that sounds serious.
Undoubtedly. I'd better leave immediately, and you'd better come too. If there's poisoning involved, your medical knowledge may be invaluable.
But what about Lord Branford's rubies?
I fear there is little we can do directly about the thief now. The life of a man is far more important than any rubies, however finely cut. I shall have to telegram Lord Branford a warning when we reach Wales, and do what I can to notify the local police, although I fear I cannot name Archibald individually without any evidence. Perhaps Inspector Lestrade could help.
We left immediately, pausing only to collect a few essential belongings hastily thrown together in our Gladstone bags. We crossed London as rapidly as possible, with Holmes paying the cabby an extra half-crown for his swift passage through the busy streets of the metropolis. At Paddington, we took the westbound train, boarding just as it was leaving the station. I was still out of breath when we found our compartment and sat down heavily on the leather seating. It was only then that we had time to relax and collect our thoughts after the morning's rush. We were not 5 minutes out of Paddington, and I had finally composed myself enough after the exertions of running for the train. As I leant backward, eyes closed and head rested on the antimacassar, my mind began to cast forward to what we might find in Wales. We had last met the Earl in 1892, when his son became involved in the affair which I had notated in the adventure of the Antipodean parrot. I was recollecting the adventure when Holmes suddenly started in a most agitated manner.
Quick, Watson, pass me that telegram.
Here you are, Holmes.
What a fool I have been. This is a forgery. A clever one, but a forgery no less.
How can you tell? There are barely 15 words on it.
Look here. See how the Earl has signed himself Alan? In Wales the name is spelled Alan, with a U, not an A. And we know how fiercely proud he is of his ancestry. He would never commit such an error.
Yes, I see.
I have no doubt that this is nothing more than a wild goose chase to prevent us from guarding Lord Branford's rubies. An intelligent one, too, as Archibald knew that if he mentioned a poisoning, I would be guaranteed to take you with me. But he will never be clever enough to better us. He has an arrogance that is common amongst the criminal classes, and that will be his downfall. We shall catch him tonight, as planned.
Norbury, I repeated in firmer tones. It was a word that I rarely used with Holmes. It related to an adventure that the detective had solved a number of years before, in which his overconfidence could have resulted in tragic consequences. Holmes had told me that whenever he felt that he was being too conceited, I should remind him of the occasion by uttering the word Norbury. In this case, I could not help but feel that my friend was underestimating his foe. I just think if he's clever enough to write that telegram, he may try something else.
Point taken, Watson. But you need not worry. We shall lay an ambush for our cat burglar friend, and he will be caught in the act, just like a rat in a trap.
And so, later that evening, Holmes and I made our way to the great house. Not wishing to alarm or alert any of the guests, we disguised ourselves as waiters. So convincing were our disguises that we passed through the ballroom itself without being uncovered, even when I had the misfortune to stumble and spill a glass of wine over her ladyship. On the way through, Holmes learnt that, as expected, Archibald was one of the guests. In fact, he was making quite a show of overindulging in champagne. As the meal was drawing to a close, we made our way stealthily into the billiard room and secreted ourselves behind a pair of heavy curtains that covered French windows that led out onto a charming veranda. It was a little after midnight when we witnessed Lord Branford deposit a pouch containing the rubies into the safe. Then our silent vigil began. The whole house seemed incredibly quiet following the celebrations, save for the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corridor outside. It had just struck 4 o'clock when Holmes alerted me to the slow movement of the opening door. In stepped Archibald, carrying a small bag containing the tools of his trade. He made his way over to the safe and set about his work. Firstly, he examined the 3 separate locks with minute attention, and then, whilst carefully listening, he tried each of several finely turned metal wires. Eventually, there was a series of satisfying clicks, and Archibald swung open the heavy metal door. It was then that we stepped out from our hiding place. I steadily gripped my trusty service revolver in my right hand.
That's enough, Archibald. Place the rubies back in the safe. My dear Holmes, and you too, Dr. Watson. What a pleasant surprise. I take it my little communiqué did not compel you to travel to Wales after all. No, it did not. I made but one error. Nevertheless, it was enough for me to see through the fraud.
Quite obvious, really. You see, you mixed up your A's and your U's. An elementary mistake, if I may say so.
A shame. A great shame. Perhaps, then, we could have avoided this little contretemps.
It is more than that, for your error will cost you several years in jail. More importantly, your position and status.
I don't think so. Manfred, if you wouldn't mind. I believe you've been trumped, Mr. Holmes. Now be a dear and drop the revolver.
Do as he says, Watson.
Thanks to the vivid accounts of your adventures provided by Watson here, I felt sure of your modus operandi. It was at my friend's insistence that I agreed to a little, insurance.
What are you going to do with us now?
That poses a problem. Despite being prepared for this eventuality, I really had hoped that you would have had the decency to fall for my message. You know, the only thing I can think of is to arrest the both of you for the crime.
What?
I am certain that you agree, Mr. Holmes. It is the only logical solution. I simply got up in the middle of the night to fetch a glass of water. I did appear to literally partake of champagne this evening. I heard noises from the billiard room and entered to find 2 strange men and an open safe. What else would England's greatest hero do but wrestle them to the ground and tie them up? And the fact that you're so skillfully disguised yourself will only help me in my deceit.
You rogue! To have us arrested for your offence while you make your escape? It's disgraceful.
You could always accuse me of the crime, but of course no one would believe you, especially without any evidence. You see, no one knows that Manfred and I are here, and the rubies we will be returning to London post-haste.
We shall have to concede defeat this once. But I promise you that it is I who will be successful when next we meet.
I'd hoped you'd see it that way. Oh, we're all gentlemen after all.
True to his word, we were gagged and bound by Archibald and his accomplice. And once he had gone, Archibald lost no time in raising the household. Presently, Holmes and I were led away by the local constable without having time to muster a protest or raise an objection. It was late morning by the time our true identities had been confirmed. Holmes and I promptly returned to the house with the local policeman, where we were greeted by the despairing Lord Brantford. He was even more upset to find out from the constable that the arrests were flawed and that no clues in the case remained. At this, Holmes simply tutted. He then marched into the billiard room and, as if by magic, produced the missing rupees from the corner pocket of the table. On seeing the jewels, his lordship clapped his hands in delight, whilst the constable stood open-mouthed in wonderment. Unbeknownst to them, prior to Archibald's arrival, Holmes had broken into the safe and replaced the rubies in their small pigskin bag with a handful of small pebbles. He had then tied the gems to his handkerchief and concealed them in one of the pockets of the billiard table. This was to be his protection against all unforeseen occurrences. When pressed on how he had recovered the rubies, Holmes explained that he had anticipated a robbery by persons unknown. He had arrived with me in disguise and waited for a criminal gang to appear. During the robbery, they had tried to apprehend the intruders, and in the commotion, Holmes had wrestled the gems from the burglars. He had then hidden them in the billiard table for safekeeping. It was just after we were about to chase after the thieves when Archibald entered and bowled us over without giving us a chance to explicate ourselves. Once the rubies were safely returned, the matter was swiftly closed. The local police were not keen to be in the papers for arresting the celebrated Sherlock Holmes, whilst letting the real thieves, whoever they may be, escape. Lord Brantford also had no desire for it to be known that he had been the target of a burglary. And so it was again that Holmes and I, after an early lunch at the stately home, boarded the train together to return to London. However, this time Holmes was in a more communicative mood, and as the train slowly drew out of the station, he pulled his pipe from his mouth and looked at me.
Well, Watson, what do you make of the affair?
Well, we can hardly call it a success, but we did prevent his lordship's rubies from being stolen.
No, it was more like a draw. Just think, if you hadn't been so insistent that I was taking Archibald too lightly, I would have never cracked the safe earlier in the night and replaced the jewels with my own insurance. It is down to you that we escaped embarrassment, old man. All down to you.
Nothing. It was nothing, really.
And I promise you this. Next time I come face to face with Leslie Archibald, Captain of England and gentleman thief, I shall need no coaxing from you to hold his capabilities in the highest regard.
Question of the Clever Cat Burglar on the Joe Bev Show. Tune in to hear more adventures of Sherlock Holmes next time.
Would you like to hear more Joe Bev? Go to Amazon.com and search